Hi everybody, welcome to this week's Stitch Session episode. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm so excited to have you join us today. I think you're really gonna enjoy the project that I've got in store for you today. And I think you can tell the project that we're gonna be working on are these super easy make mittens. And so you can see I've done them in a color block fashion. And I'm really excited for all of my super beginners out there because this is created using a square panel. So a lot of you guys, when you first start learning to crochet, the first thing you work on are things like scarves and blankets because they're nice and easy, kind of squared off projects. And something like mittens can seem really daunting, especially with the rounded tops and your thumbs. And in this tutorial, I'm just going to walk you step by step using your very first stitch that you generally learn other than the chain, which is the single crochet stitch. And with that stitch alone and using a square panel, you are going to be able to create your very own pair of mittens. And I did these using some leftover scrap yarn, and I'm super excited because I managed to use it all. I've just got a little wee bit of the green left, and I think it came out really cool. So, by the way, those of you that watched the Christmas cabin cushion tutorial, you'll recognize these colors because I had, this yarn is the yarn that was left over from that project. So I can't wait to get you guys started. So let's just take a look at the materials we need for this project and let's start stitching up our easy stitch mitts. So here are the materials that I'm using for this project. The yarn that I have is a lot of leftover scrap yarn. It is a bulky weight yarn I'm using here, and this is Bernat Softy Chunky. Last year I did a mitten tutorial using this type of yarn, and I'll leave a link for all those projects in the description box down below. It is considered a bulky size 6, in fact a super bulky size 6, and they recommend using an 8mm hook, which is the hook I'm going to use for this project. Now, this comes in 100-gram balls. If you're going to do solid colors, like I'm not sure if you can find this exact yarn. I know that Bernat still does make a Softy Chunky, so feel free to use that. If you're going to use a medium weight 4 yarn, you will need more, obviously. So I would recommend picking up at least 200 grams worth, just to make sure you don't run out. Really, one ball should be enough to create one pair. But if you're going to switch up your colors like I am, I would definitely recommend getting a couple of these balls. So the colors that I have are green, gray, and red. You don't have to use these colors. You can create your own colorway, or as I said, you can do it in a solid color. So the hook I have is the 8mm hook. I find for bulkier projects, this was a hook I picked up ages ago. I think I may have found it at Walmart. It's a plastic hook, but I just find it's so much more comfortable for me to use when I'm working with bulky yarn. So that's the hook. Make sure, as always, that you have a pair of scissors to snip off your yarn and a trusty darning needle to sew in your ends. Now I've got 2 of these here because I wanted to show you guys. This is generally the needle I use. I also have this wool eye needle, and you can see the eye bends out a little bit or spreads out a little bit and creates a larger space. This is very handy for bulky or super bulky yarn. I can usually make do with this one, but if you can and you want to, you can pick up one of these. I, again, found this one at Walmart. You can probably find it on Amazon if you are looking for it. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so I'm going to start with my red yarn. I don't have much here, but this is just a perfect amount for what we are going to start with. So as I said in the intro, what we're doing is we're basically going to create a fairly square-ish panel, just like this. And from this panel, we are going to then fold it and create our thumbs, and you have got your mittens. So we are going to start with this bottom portion here. This is going to be your cuff, okay? So if I just place my hand here, so you can see, it'll be able to wrap around quite nicely. So that is what we're going to start with. Okay, so you're gonna begin by placing a slip knot on your hook. You wanna actually leave a bit of a longer tail here because you're gonna wanna use this to sew up the side of your mitten. So let's just leave a little bit of a tail and then place a slip knot, whoops. And then place a slip knot on your hook here. Okay, so you've got a bit of a tail and you've got your knot. And we're gonna create the width of our cuff here. So we're gonna chain 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, if you want a longer cuff, of course, you can do more. And the width of my cuff measures approximately 2 inches, FYI. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna find the second chain from your hook, and we are going to place a single crochet into it. Remember that we never count the loop that's currently on your hook. So we count 1 and 2, and we're gonna insert, and we are gonna create a single crochet, just like that. And that is what we're gonna do into every single chain. So into the next chain, you'll insert your hook, pull up a loop, and single crochet. If you are a tight crocheter, just be wary that you are gonna wanna work back into these stitches. Going up another hook size may help you if you've got a 9mm hook lying around, not a very common size, but it does exist, or you can go up as high as a 10mm hook just for your first chains, just to help you kind of be able to insert your hook comfortably, and then go back down to an 8mm hook for the rest of the project. Okay, so that's what we're doing all the way to the end here. Once you get to the end of row 1, your work is going to look like that. You're now going to have 5 stitches that you're working into. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So from now on, every row is going to have 5 stitches. So moving on to row 2, what you want to do is you want to chain 1 and turn your work. Okay, and then what we're going to do is right back into the very first stitch, so that's it right there. We are going to place single crochets into each stitch again. However, we want to create a little bit of that ribbed effect for our cuff, so we're actually going to work into the back loops only. So if you turn your work so you can look at the tops of your stitches, you're going to see a loop that's closest to you, that's the front loop, and there's a loop that's furthest away from you, that's the back loop. So we're actually going to insert our hook into the back loops only. So it's like you're going right down into the center of your stitch, just like that, picking up 1 loop and single crochet. Okay, then we go into the next one, into the back loop only, and single crochet. And again, you're going to do that all the way down to the end of your row. Whoops. And then this is the chain 1 where we turned. So sometimes you just need to kind of turn it around so you can see it a little bit better. You want to insert your hook and single crochet. And if you're ever unsure, just go back and count your stitches. And I always like to count from my loop, and then I know where I'm at. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So you see how it pushes the front loops forward? That's what creates that little ribbed effect. So if I pick up my panel here, see, that's where you can see those ribs coming through. And that is what you're going to repeat for a total of 16 rows. Okay, so I'm going to take you through this again. We're going to chain 1, turn your work, and make sure you go right back into the very first stitch there, which is right there. Insert your hook and single crochet. And again, insert your hook and single crochet. Okay, I think you get the gist. Pretty straightforward. And single crochet stitches are basically the only stitches we're using for this project. So again, very beginner friendly. So you can see there it created a ridge, and on the other side. So for me, I did a total, including row 1, a total of 16 rows. Now for me, 16 rows was enough to be able to then wrap around my wrist. You don't want it to be too loose, but you don't want it to be too snug either, because you want it to be comfortable to slip your hand in and out. So if for you, maybe you only need 10 rows if you've got a really thin wrist, or you might need 18 rows. So just gauge by that. I would say I have an average medium size adult hand, so 16 rows was plenty for me. And just in case you're looking for the actual measurement, that gave me approximately 8 inches or 20 centimeters. Okay, so go ahead and do that, and I'll meet you back up here once you've completed your cuff. Okay, so I just had enough left to finish my cuff here. So what I want to do is we are now going to start on the body of the hand, or the hand. So in my case, I started with the gray here. Again, if you're using a solid color, you wouldn't have to worry about it. You would just continue on. Okay, so what we want to do now is we are going to work into the sides of our rows. So far we worked our cuff this way. We're now going to create our work moving along the side, back and forth. So you're just going to find a nice easy spot here. So you have these ridges and you have what I call these dips, okay? And that's what I'm going to use as a gauge to create the first row here. So the very first row here is what I would call a ridge row, okay? So see the ridge there? There's a dip here, so that means this is a ridge row. So I'm just going to find the very last stitch, and that's a chain 1 turn. So I'm just going to nestle my hook somewhere in here where I feel it's going to be fairly secure. I'm going to try and pick up more than one loop, just because for me, I feel that makes it feel more sturdy. There we go. And this is where I'm going to introduce my next color. Now, some of you may opt to put a slip knot on your hook first, and sometimes I do that. But for bulky yarn, I tend not to do that because I find it just creates a little bit of extra knots in my work. So I'm just going to take that through, pull it through. I'm going to just throw that tail over so it gets trapped in, and then I'm going to chain 1. And that's pretty secure. It's not going anywhere. And now what I'm going to do is continue on using single crochet stitches. So I know I have 16 rows, so I'm going to end up having 16 stitches. Again, if yours is 17 or 18, then that is what you want to go by. So I'm going to go back into this space here, and I am going to single crochet. So that chain 1 just gave us a little bit of height. So I'm going to single crochet. So that's a ridge row. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the dip, and see when I pull my work apart, there is a space waiting for me right here. So I'm just going to insert my hook. As you can see, I'm going to work over that tail right there. And I'm going to single crochet. Next is a ridge row. So I just want to find a spot that looks pretty good. And I'm going to insert my hook and single crochet. Okay, so there's a ridge row, a dip. This is the ridge row, and now into the dip. See how you can see there's a space right there? I just insert and single crochet. This is a ridge row, so I'm going to just kind of nestle my hook somewhere at the end here. Sometimes it's a chain 1 turning. It's a turning chain, so you're just going to have to go with what you feel. Next is a dip row, which I'm going to insert right there. And I think you get the gist now. So you can see how the stitches are nestling into the side of our previous rows. So I had 16 rows. I'm going to have 16 stitches at the end. So go ahead and do that to the end, and I will meet you back here shortly. Okay, I've completed row 1 of my hand portion here. And so I still have 16 stitches, 16 rows, 16 stitches. So my work looks like that. And now we're going to go into row 2. So we're going to chain 1 and turn our work. And now we have stitches to work into. So we're going to go into the very first stitch, place a single crochet. And we're going to place 1 single crochet into each stitch all the way across. And at the end of row 2, you should still have 16 stitches. And what we're going to do is we are going to repeat We're going to repeat row 2 for another 2 additional rows. So you're going to complete row 2, chain 1, turn your work, 1 single crochet into row 3, chain 1, turn your work, and 1 single crochet into each stitch for row 4. Okay, so I'm in the middle of row 2. I'm going to meet back up with you once I've completed row 4. 1 single crochet into each stitch. Okay, I've completed row 4 and my work looks something like this. Now, this is basically what you're going to continue to do to create the height of your hand, and you're going to keep going until you get to just a little bit above your middle finger. You want to have a little bit of wiggle room. We're going to need some space to cinch in your work. So I did a total of, if you're doing the color blocking like I am here, I did a total of 10 rows and 10 rows of the green. So in total for my hand portion, I have 20 rows. Again, you may need 22, 23. You just gauge by the height of your hand with a little bit of extra give at the top, okay? So, but you're wondering why I stopped you at row 4 right now. What we're gonna do is for row 5, we're gonna create a bit of an increase because as you can see, your hand does flare out slightly. So that's why we need to do a little bit of an increase. I do want this particular mitten to be somewhat cozy to my hand. I've done other projects where I've left a lot of wiggle room, but this one I want it to flare a little bit, but still be somewhat kind of cozy and snug to my hand. Not tight though, so be careful with that for you tight crocheters. So what we're gonna do is we're simply gonna add an increase on each end of this next row. So that means we're going to increase the number of stitches. So for row 5, you're going to chain 1 and turn like you normally do. You're going to go back into that first stitch and place a single crochet. And then you're going to go again into the same stitch and add another single crochet. So we've essentially placed 2 stitches into 1, and that is an increase. Now for the rest of the stitches, you're just going to continue on placing 1 single crochet into each stitch, okay? Until you get to the very last stitch, and I'll meet you there and talk you through doing an increase for those of you that are super new. Okay, I've got 1 stitch left, so I'm going to place an increase here as well. So I'm going to insert my hook and just place a single crochet like I normally do. And now I'm going to go back into that same stitch and place another single crochet. So at the end of round 5, you will now have 18 stitches instead of 16. And you're going to notice just a very, very subtle little flare out, okay? And because this is bulky yarn, I only did 1 increase, and that's going to be right here. And you may be wondering, well, why did you wait till row 5 to do the increase? And that's because when I gauge kind of where my hand is in the glove, right about here is when we're really going to start seeing a little bit more of a flare, okay? Now the rest of the project is super easy. You're just going to continue on, chain 1. So this is row 6 we're going into. And you're just going to do 1 single crochet into the first stitch and then 1 single crochet as usual. Okay, so the rest of the project is done just like this. Easy peasy. And you're now going to continue repeating these rows until, so you can see it's a little bit of a flare. You're going to continue repeating these rows until you get the height of your hand. And of course, if you're doing color blocking like me, you would stop at row 10, snip your yarn, attach the new color exactly the same way I did here, and then do the next 10 rows. So the goal is to end up with a panel just like this. Now I want you to notice something too, and I made a boo-boo here because I don't feel I did it long enough. If you're doing color blocking, now you can actually do this one of 2 ways. When you snip your yarn, leave a longer tail because you want to have the tails of each color available when you're sewing in the side, okay? Because you want to make sure that you leave a nice seamless look. The other thing you can do is just make sure that you have a nice long separate tail of this color. Now, because I have very little supply, it's just these are some scraps I have left over, I made sure to leave a long tail either at the beginning of the new color or at the end, just to make sure I had enough left. But just be aware of that. If you're using several colors, you want to make sure that you have the color, the same color of your tail to sew in that section. We'll talk about that when we're putting it together. Okay, so this is where I leave you for a little while. Go ahead and finish your panel, and then I will meet up with you then. What I would recommend, actually, finish your panel, then go and do the second panel. And before we start the construction, I find that sometimes when we've worked just on one and we've completed the whole thing, we come back to the second one. Sometimes either your hands are tired, whatever the case may be. I notice that the gauge will always adjust, and every crocheter and knitter out there will attest to this. If you're making mittens or booties or slippers or socks, anything in pairs, they never, ever, ever come out precisely exactly the same. You could have the same stitches, the same everything, but I really think it's just, you know, because they're being made by hand, and as humans, the hands get tired or you readjust as you go along. They're never quite exact. So sometimes I find doing these pieces back and forth kind of helps the situation a little bit. Like some people would even do one cuff, then do the second cuff, then come back, do the panel, and do the panel. So I'm going on and on a little bit, but for those of you that have a little bit more experience and kind of want to play with this concept, I just thought I'd throw it out there for you. So I leave you here, and I'll meet you back here in a little bit when we're going to put our mitten together. Okay, so I have completed both of my panels. Now I've gone ahead and sewn up one of my mittens already, because I kind of like to have a model to show you guys. So this is the final product here, and we literally are taking just a panel and bringing it together to create this mitten. So what you want to do now, and this is why we needed to leave these tails at the end, and of course just make sure you have a little extra if you need, is we're now going to fold this over, okay? And so again, you just want to make sure that it fits nicely. Now I'm making this one a little bit kind of snug, so I'm going to start here. And so essentially, you just want to make sure that the panel kind of rolls over, and you want to make sure that your thumb stays out, because of course we're going to crochet our thumb still onto our mitten. So the reason why we're doing this right now is so where we can gauge where our thumb is actually going to come out, because we want to make sure we don't sew up that part together. And funny thing is when I was working on this one, I wasn't paying attention. I sewed up the cuff, and then I, was watching a show, and then I decided to keep sewing and sewing and sewing, and then I realized, oh no, I've sewed up my thumb hole. So I had to go back and undo it, which was a real pain in the butt. So just make sure you're aware of that. So for now, what we're going to do is we are going to fold our panel in half, and now you're going to take your tail and you are going to sew up your cuff portion. And this is why having the color of each block is important, because it just gives you a nice seamless look just like that. Okay, so this is where we're going to take our threading needle here, and just going to put that in there. Now I am completely out of this red color, so this tail, I'm really praying that it's going to be enough to get me through. So you just want to basically line up the stitches. So remember, we had 5 stitches going across here, and you are just going to whip stitch it. So you can start from the back or the front, it doesn't really matter, as long as you're picking up a stitch. Whoops. And you're going to pull that through. Now I'm really running low here, so I'm just going to pick up the next stitch from the back and line it up with the stitch in the front and pull through. Okay, and again from the back to the front. And I'm really low on this, but I'm pretty sure I'll be okay. And pull that through and then keep going. Okay, so you get the gist. It's just a basic whip stitch and just securing our cuff here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, because I'm so low on this, I'm going to take a little bit of gray because I do have gray left. So this is a little hack for you, right? So I know I'm almost coming up to the end of my red. So I'm just going to knot a little bit of this gray here. Just like that. And then I'm going to use the gray, whoops, to keep going. So I like it when stuff like this happens because I'm sure it does happen for you guys, and a lot of people don't really kind of explain how to handle this. So got a little bit of that red there. I am going to now whip stitch one more little section here. And the gray is coming through, but that's going to hold me over to the next section. So, and this is the wrong side out, by the way. So whatever side you stitch, that's going to be the inside of your mitten. So now I'm just going to pull that nice and tight. And now I know my red is secured, and that's only going to be on the inside. So when you turn it this way, see, the red is where it should be. So there we go. So now what I'm going to do is I am just going to try this on again. And it doesn't really matter if you do the left or the right. This is the exact same replica because our seam is on the inside of the hand. It doesn't really matter. So you see, I can afford to actually sew up a couple of stitches of the gray, which is going to help out my red portion here. So I'm just going to find first stitch of the gray there and then the front part there. I'm going to pull that through. And I know the knot may make it seem a little confusing, but it'll all work out in the end. And I'm going to do one more. I'm going to go to the next one up and there. And that's most likely where I'm going to leave it because now I want to leave a gap for my thumb hole. Okay, and you can always sew in those little ends afterwards. So again, I'm going to try this on. And that actually works out nicely because that's where my thumb comes out. And now what I want to do is just mark where my thumb should close up. So you want it to be nice and comfortable. You don't want it to be too tight. So I'm going to close it up right about there. So I'm just going to take my hand out and I'm going to put, actually I'm going to do this. I'm going to put just a marker here. You can use a safety pin, which if you have one handy is probably the best thing. And then all I want to do now is I just want to create a little bit of a knot here so that I can snip off the gray yarn right here. Okay. And I just like to knot it a couple of times. This is the part of the work that's can be a little bit tedious. It's not very glamorous, but this is the fun part where you actually see it starting to become a mitten. Remember when you first did that panel, you probably thought, how the heck is this going to become a mitten? Well, here we go. So now we're going to snip off our yarn and then we can weave in that end afterwards. Okay, so now I'm going to come back and I'm going to find where this tail is and I'm going to use it. So I really try and use up my ends as wisely as possible. So I'm going to weave that here, okay? And I'm going to line up my grays, my gray ends there, and I just want to poke that through. And now I'm going to whip stitch back down to this marker here. Okay, so you can do it from front to back or back to front, whatever works for you. Now this is not always an exact science, especially when you're using bulky yarn. So you really have to go, number one, you want to make sure that you count the number of rows to make it really precise. And you also just want to eyeball it a lot of the time, like what looks right to you, right? So there we go. I've gone right up to where my marker is. And now all I'm going to do is just bring it through a couple of times and knot it so that it's nice and secure. And then I'm ready to do the final block. So see, I'm just going to bring that through there and put a knot. And for those of you experienced, I know this part may, you know what you're doing. This may seem tedious for you, so you can go ahead and skip to the next portion, the thumb portion. But if you're a real beginner, I just want to make sure that you see clearly what I'm doing and where to go from here. So I'm just going to show you, I'm going to quickly weave in this little tail here just to get it out of the way. So I'm just going to bring that through. There we go. So the goal is I just want to hide that little tail, and then maybe I'm going to go backwards just to make sure that it's nice and hidden in there. Just pick up a few loops, just like that. That's what I love about this wool-eye needle. It's very wide and relaxed, so it's a lot easier to get your bulky yarn through. Okay, there we go. So I feel pretty happy with that. I'm just going to snip this off, and there you go. So now you've officially created your thumb hole. Try that on. Yep, feels pretty comfortable. I can wiggle it around. And now you're going to do the rest. So with your green, you're now going to cinch up your green. Because I've got this long tail, I'm going to cinch up from the top to the bottom. If you did not leave a long tail, what I would recommend is you definitely cut off a separate tail, nice and long, and start from here and go all the way up. You're still gonna have a bit of a long tail left over, and then I'm gonna show you what we're gonna do to cinch up the top. So go ahead and finish up sewing up your side, and I will take you through cinching up the top before we move on to our thumb. Okay, so I finished sewing up my full seam here, and if you are one of the ones that started from here to the top and you've got your tail left over, this is what it'll look like. Otherwise, you can just attach a tail here and it's no big deal. So what we're gonna do is we're going to cinch up our top. See how you can see your stitches here? So what you're gonna do is you're gonna just weave your needle in. You're gonna go in and out, in and out, all the way around, just at the top there. You're gonna pull your tail through, and you're gonna continue in and out, all the way until you come back to where you started. And as you can see, if you pull it as you go along, see how it starts to cinch in? That's exactly what we wanna do. So weave it in all the way around. Okay, so I have come all the way around. So I've started to pull, see how there's a little hole there? So I just started to pull, and you can see it's just cinching it in nice and tight. And don't be afraid to pull, because it's got to go through all of those stitches. And now to secure it, what I want to do is I'm just going to go across here and make sure that it stays shut. Whoops. So I go across. So it's just kind of like you're knotting it back and forth, but I go across from the bottom to the top, and then I go from each side. And the great thing about using the same color is it all gets lost in there. You don't have to worry about any weird stitching. As long as that top is cinched nicely, we are good to go. So you're just going to do this a few times. Doesn't matter how many. Some people like to do a lot. Some people like to do a little. As long as you feel that it's nice and secure, you're good. Okay, oops. And then I'm just gonna put that through there to create a knot. Nice and tight, and I'm gonna snip off my yarn. And now the main part, oops, I still have to weave in that. So this is the inside. So again, I'm gonna try on my mitten. And that is perfect. So I can feel my middle finger, which is my tallest finger, is still barely touching. So there's actually lots of room. It's very roomy. Considering when we folded it over, it looked pretty snug, but it feels very comfortable. I don't like mittens where I'm swimming around too much in there, because if I need to hold on to things, it gets a bit difficult. So I'm very happy with how this came out. My thumb hole's here. Now what we need to do is turn it right side out in order to work on creating our thumb. So I'm gonna take that like that, and see, and now you can see your top is just really nicely closed in, and it creates that nice rounded top, and your seam is beautifully collected together, and there you go. So just need to sew that tail in. And I'm very happy with the cuff. Some people like a longer cuff, like I said before, so you might want to chain 6 or 8. It's totally up to you, but I'm very happy with how that came out. And again, you can put it on any hand. That's the beauty of this kind of project, is you can really put it on any hand. So let's get working on creating our thumb. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is you want to count up the number of rows that you've got for your opening. Now, this will vary depending on your hand and how wide you want your thumb to be. Like I said, I'm pretty average. So I have 5 rows that I left unseamed. So that means I'm going to place a stitch into the side of each row and on both sides. So if I've got 5 rows, that means I'm going to end up having 10 stitches. And it is important that you work this right side facing out, because you're going to be working in the round and you want your stitches facing right side out. So I recommend starting at the base here and just inserting your hook anywhere. See, it's going to be a big jumble jamble, it's going to look like, because it's the side of rows and stitches, but just insert your hook anywhere that you feel like it'll work. So I'm going to insert my hook there. I'm just going to hook my yarn, pull it through, just like that. And then I'm going to chain 1, and that'll secure my work, okay? And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right into this first space here that becomes available, and I'm going to single crochet. So that's the side of my first row, and I'm just going to try to work over that tail. So I'm going to single crochet just like that. Don't worry that it's pulling out a little bit. It'll all kind of relax once we finish it. So that's the first row. There's the gap of the second row. So generally they're going to present themselves to you, okay? So there is the second single crochet. I'm going to move into the next one. So right there, there's the third. Okay, and there is the fourth. So you can see it's just working right into there. And now we've got the fifth, which is right here. Now, if you end up with 9 stitches at the end, it's not a big deal, okay? There we go. So I'm going to go all the way around. So now I'm just going to move over to this next side here. I'm not going to worry about this little gap here. I want to move to the other side. And what that's going to do is that's really going to bring in the 2 sides together. And I'm just going to keep going along here. And we are going to work in the continuous round for this thumb. And that just means we're not going to slip stitch to join, okay? So the next one is right there. And I'm almost at the very beginning, and there's a bit of a gap, so I'm going to do one more. It's a bit tight in here, so I'm just going to, whoops. Just like that, okay? And so normally you would slip stitch to join. You can, okay? But I'm gonna show you what I'm gonna do. And right now I'm just gonna count back. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And actually I have 11. So just goes to show you, you just wanna really make sure that it's pleasing to the eye, it looks seamless, and I'm happy with that. And then again, I just put it on. So now I can see that it's starting to hug my thumb here, okay? Really nicely. And so now what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to continue crocheting in this spiral round. So I'm not gonna slip stitch. I'm actually gonna go into the top of that first stitch, but I'm gonna single crochet, just like that. And I'm gonna continue placing 1 single crochet into each stitch all the way around. And I'm gonna keep building it row by row until I get the height that's gonna completely cover the tip of my thumb, Okay, so I'm just doing a few more here. I'm going a little bit quicker because these are single crochets. You should be fairly well versed at this point on your single crochet stitch. So I'm just inserting into there. Got another one there. And I'm coming up to the beginning again, whoops, of my round. If you want, you can place a stitch marker there just so that you remember where the stop and start of the round is. But at this point, it's not really going to make too much of a difference. And this one right there, and I'm pretty good. So now I'm going to go to the top here of the beginning of the second round, and I'm just going to single crochet again as usual. What I like to do at the end of every round, just to kind of make sure it's still feeling good. Yep, I like it. Okay, you're just going to keep doing that until you get enough rows or rounds to cover the tip of your thumb. So you're going to get something that looks like this. Now for me, I ended up doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 rounds. Okay, it will be different for you as always, depending on the length of your thumb, how much room you like at the top. Like I said, I don't want it to be too roomy. I can feel the tip of my tongue just wiggling at the top there. Doesn't feel constricted, and I'm pretty happy with that. So go ahead and do the number of rounds you need. I'm going to do 9 rounds, and then I'm going to meet back up with you when we cinch up the top of our thumb. We're almost there, and you will have completed your easy peasy mittens. Okay, I have finished 9 rows. So I am now going to snip off my yarn. I'm going to leave a bit of a tail here, and I'm going to get my wool needle here, and I'm going to knot that. And I'm going to weave it back in and out just like I did with the top of the mitten. Now here's the thing. Normally, if you were using any other yarn, I would recommend you turning your mitten inside out to do this. With bulky yarn, and because this is such a narrow little space, I have tried it before, it is very challenging. Not that it can't be done, but it's just basically a pain in the butt. So I'm just not going to worry about it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do what we did before, weave it back in and out, just like that. You're going to have to pull it as you go. And we're just going to do it with the right side facing out. And it's not the end of the world. So there we go. We're back at the beginning. And so you have this little cinch nice and tight, just like that. Okay. And then you're going to just maybe go across once because it's a smaller opening. And I'm just going to create a little knot here. And then I'm going to step across one more time. And don't worry about this knot showing because you're now going to put your yarn in through the inside. Okay. And then I'm just going to weave it in a few times just along down the side here, just to secure it so your top is nice and closed. And I'm just going to do a quick little weave in just to hide that tail a bit. Just like that. And then I'm going to snip my yarn. And your mitten is complete. Woohoo! See how easy that was? All of this came from creating a square panel. So now what you want to do is try them on. And there you have it. The easiest mittens to create. And I just actually love this color block. And I'm also really excited because the only thing I have left of my scraps is this and this. So I did use up all of my red, most of my gray, and just a little bit of the green. Now my challenge is to figure out what the heck am I going to make with this little guy. Anywho, I'm sure I'll come up with something. So I hope you guys had fun working on this project, especially for you super beginners. I hope this got you excited on feeling like you can really tackle some interesting projects. And again, just using simple single crochet stitches. Now, if you have any questions, as always, just leave me a comment in the comment box down below, or you can reach me directly at info@crochetcrafty.com, and make sure you visit the website and sign up for my monthly newsletter, because I gift you a free written pattern every month as a thank you for saying, thanks for coming along on my crochet journey. And come and say hi to me. I'm on the socials on Facebook and Instagram at The Stitch Sessions. I love hanging out with you guys so much. Thank you for all of your comments. I read every single one of them. And I haven't forgotten those of you that have sent in requests for tutorials and or written patterns. It's just me here, so it's taking me a little bit of time, but I will get to them. Hang in there, and you will see your requested tutorial and or written pattern either in my newsletter or in my Etsy shop. So stay tuned for that. All right, guys, have an amazing week. Happy crocheting. Take really good care of yourselves, and I so look forward to seeing you guys next week for more crochet fun. Bye-bye.